How do you open this? Here?
Hello and welcome back to another video. Yay! Today we're going to talk about why I'm actually dogshit terrible at watercolor. Not gonna lie, I'm extremely ashamed of every single study I'm showing you in this video. Actually, I feel like they're hideous, and while I can say there's a marked improvement over time, I don't think anyone will be delusional enough to say that they're actually good. So the question is now, like, why am I sharing this? Well, the short reason is I have a nice thumbnail, and we all know thumbnails are like king of YouTube. But the longer and more sincere reason is I want to be honest with you. On YouTube especially, I feel like we see these very brilliant, talented artists who just wield watercolor like, I don't know, like it's some sort of secret weapon to make these beautiful pieces, and they have this almost innate intuition on how watercolor pigments work and how to control like the water in their brush to create like stunning artworks. And no shade to anyone, but these beautiful artworks like inspired me as much as it deluded me into thinking that I could paint like that too. Obviously, I could not paint like that, as you'll see, but also obviously I really want to paint like that. So this video would be a safe point of sorts of my progress, where I go through the 5 reasons why my watercolor studies fail and what I'm thinking of doing to making sure they don't fail anymore moving forward. I hope this video is a useful like checklist for you to refer back to, just in case you feel like your watercolor art feels a bit off too. Maybe I feel like it'll be easier to see your mistakes if you have a reference point to check with, aka mine. And with that, let's get to the reasons. Okay, so reason number 1, I don't get how watercolors work. So watercolors are a transparent medium. Like, that should not be profound, but I tend to forget that at the start when I'm actually painting. Like, every layer you add to the paper darkens the overall piece. So that contributed to the problem of muddy colors, which I'll talk about later, but more pertinently, it means that it becomes almost impossible to create highlights without either scrubbing the paper or with an opaque medium. And even if I did scrub hard enough, the colors in the shadows will still be muddy and overall create an unpleasant appearance. So let's look at my work, for example. Like, in my references, I wanted to recreate this like yellow hue of sunshine in my work, but I went about it in the wrong way. I was approaching it like it's opaque, like a paint by numbers sort of thing, and added yellow to the highlights and shadow tones, thinking that it would shift the overall hue more towards yellow. But then what I realized is that if you actually do that, you're actually darkening areas of a yellow hue rather than shifting it. So to overcome this problem, I'm trying doing 2 things. So the first thing is I needed to get it through my thick skull that working with watercolors is like using the multiply layer and only that blending mode throughout the entire illustration. I can control the transparency of how diluted my mixes are, but I have to realize that ultimately every layer of watercolor I add will always darken. So that means I have to be more careful with how many layers I use, and ultimately be more careful with how intensely I want the shadows to look to avoid having muddy areas. The second thing is that I had to be more careful with the highlights. So for example, if I want this highlight to be yellow, for example here, then I'll have to do a wash in yellow first and then make sure I don't add any layer to it, any paint in the areas that I want to keep like pale or light in color to keep the highlights as fresh as possible. And the second reason number 2, I am not consistent with the colors I use to mix my shadows. So like my previous reason, this blunder results in muddy, disagreeable colors. We see this consistently in the way I quote-unquote render hair, where the first layer I used like a dark brown, and in the next layer I suddenly switched to this bluish purple tone, for instance, because I was too lazy to mix another shade of brown. And as a result, the hair typically looks sloppily done and overall just unpleasant. And on the flip side, we see that being too earnest is also an issue, because the subject's face is the center of attention in these studies. I try too hard to quote-unquote capture every nuance in the skin tone, like trying to capture the subtle hue shifts from greenish to reddish without thinking more broadly whether the colors actually looked good together. So the solution then obviously is to be more intentional with the colors I mix. So before painting, I have to decide the colors that I want to emphasize on and have every other color mix I create serve to enhance them such that I can have a more unified color scheme. The same can be said when mixing shadows, so I'll have to think about what I want the piece to look like. Like, for example, do I want the shadow to be brown leaning, green leaning, blue leaning? This difference matters because it'll help me keep the colors consistent and have a more clean look by the end of it. Right now, since I'm still practicing with these orangey, sunlighty sort of references, I'd like to inject some ultramarine blue into every shadow I cook up. I like the granulation effect, and I like how it just neutralizes every warm orange red tone I put down. The third reason then is that I half-ass everything that isn't the face, so that means ears, hair, and clothes typically look like shit. I claim that it's just my style where I render these elements loosely to get the bare minimum values of the elements that should be there to avoid distracting from the face with too many details. Now, we all know that's just an excuse for me personally, because I am personally quite uncomfortable with rendering other parts of the subject with effort. For the hair, I really want these aesthetic air shines you see in these very nicely rendered anime illustrations, but I'm not very good with my brush, so it typically doesn't turn out that way. For the clothes, I only just recently barely understand how clothing folds work in the line art layer of Procreate, so it's quite the jump for me to suddenly try rendering clothes. I just put down one wash and then have the audacity to call it done like a fucking loser. So what I need to do to not do this again is to obviously put in more effort. Though more broadly, I think I want to be more acquainted with watercolor enough to take risks and just enjoy the process of rendering, of putting colors down. It's a work in progress, but the fact that I realize that me being a coward with watercolor is a problem is a good start. Now, the penultimate reason, and this is the shortest one, is that I erase too much of the original sketch, and that means I've lost sight of my subject's anatomical structure. This sounds ridiculous because at the start, and I assume most people will feel this way, is that the issue is the opposite, where you don't want your sketch underneath to ruin the colors, right? But for me though, when I erase too much of the original sketch, I tend to lose sight of it underneath all my shadow layers, and I do not trust myself enough to successfully make stuff up and fill in the gaps myself, aka figure out on my own how the face actually contours without a blueprint underneath. Now this results in brush strokes that aren't very confident and a somewhat misshapen final product that loses the precision I had in my sketch. Obviously, the best solution is just not to erase everything. I can be more intentional with my pencil marks, what I want to keep on the page, so that I'll have a proper guide to make sure the values line up properly. I think more broadly, I should just practice more so that if I really have to, I know where the shadow should be and that I don't need to rely so much on my initial sketch. Okay, but TMI though, a few days after filming this video, I tried painting again, this time not erasing as much except for the T-cross lines you see people do in the initial phases of constructing their face, and it turned out so much better. What I realized is that since I tend to use a lot of layers to build up color, the work I put in with watercolor typically covers up the pencil lines anyway, so that was encouraging. In fact, it even helped me with rendering the nostrils and contouring some small details like the eyes and the eyelid. So I guess that's something I should just do moving forward. Just retaining more of the original sketch underneath my watercolor work. And last but not least, this is more of a PSA for me than for you, but let's get back to the abstract stuff and say that the fifth and final reason why I suck at watercolor is that I had incredibly unrealistic expectations that make me feel worse about my work than I need to. Okay? So basically, don't be delusional. If you're just starting out like myself, of course the work you produce will be terrible. You won't make top tier stuff from the get-go, and that's perfectly fine. For me, I was getting really cocky. Just because I'm not terrible with pencil or ballpoint pen does not mean I'll be good at watercolor as well, especially since I've been avoiding touching a paintbrush for literal years before this YouTube channel. Now, I know and hope that you're not as delusional as myself in that regard, but I hope you realize that improving takes time. Knowing where your mistakes are and how to put in actual tangible actions to overcome it is one thing, theory is one thing, but to actually put it into practice and paint and practice and accept the ugly stage is quite another altogether. I feel like it's really easy to feel and sincerely believe that you'll never be good at this if you just make one bad painting after another. A lot of people, if they hear this kind of struggle, right, they'll tell you sincerely and this wholesome advice that being bad at watercolor doesn't make you a bad artist, and that ultimately you're your own worst critic as you know your mistakes arguably better than most people. But I'm prideful as fuck, okay? I'll say that I will be good enough and that I will make brilliant watercolor art because I fucking want to. I think that watercolor will ultimately make me a better artist. It's something to be prideful of, and I really want it. I want watercolor to eventually become second nature to me, like how drawing with a ballpoint pen is. But for that to happen, to be the GOAT as the kids say, I need to humble myself and accept that I'll be mid at best for a very, very long time. I know that I will succeed and make great stuff, even if I don't feel that way. But for a long time, I just, have to accept that I won't be very good and I will be very embarrassed with what I make for a very long time as I practice and get better. But I hope that you're interested in seeing this progress. I'll make more videos in the future, I suppose, if this does well enough. Oh, but that's all for today. Shorter video. Thank you so much for watching. Yay! And of course, till the next one, please take care of yourself and I hope to see you around. Bye bye!